Hi, today we're going to be talking about more about addressing counter arguments. And in the first lecture, we look more at the big picture, thinking of in general how to get good arguments and then also how to analyze your opponent's argument to find the weaker side of it. Right now, I want to talk about some practical tactics and techniques for addressing counter arguments. So the first most important principle really is to be strong but fair. This is kind of the tenor you want to achieve throughout your essay. Um, don't just ignore your opponent's arguments, put up some resistance. I've seen students who wrote their whole essay and then at the end they tack on uh, the opponent's arguments and make a really good case in favor of the opponent. Well, they've spent the whole essay arguing for their side, and then now they demolish their own argument at the end. It's crazy. I don't know what they're thinking. No, you've got to address a counter argument means to state the opponent's argument and then respond to it. Now, having said that, you got to be strong. You got to put some resistance up. It means you've also got to be fair. You can't be using tactics that make you look like you're highly biased and not really fairly looking at your opponent's view. We'll look at that in a minute here. So first of all, let's look at some different possible ways to actually respond. Instead of just stating your opponent's argument, you got to respond. So three main techniques are, first of all, refutation. In refutation, you show your opponent's truth is wrong. Okay, they're making this counter argument. That counter argument is wrong, and that's the strongest response. And if you can, that should be your go-to response. If you can really honestly refute that argument, go for it. But in some cases, your opponent has a really good point, right? You can't just refute it every single time. Sometimes your opponents have some really good points. And in that case, you may have to go with number two. Number two is a partial concession. You grant some truth to what your opponent is saying, but you say, well, mostly it's wrong. And so it's not as strong as a refutation, but it may be necessary in some cases. Now, in some cases, your opponent has a really good point, and you can't refute it in any way. What they're saying is true and relevant. In that case, you use the concession but. Here, you grant the opponent's point. You say, yeah, you're right. But you show that there are overriding reasons on your own side that say why, that even though you're right on that point, there's all this other evidence on the other side that says, you still got to go this way. So I'll give you examples of each of these. So let's say this. Let's say you're writing an essay. Your thesis is college is worthwhile. Okay, that's your thesis. And here's your opponent's argument. One, your opponent says, well, it won't help you get a good job. Well, that's easy to refute because there's a mountain of evidence that says it will help you get a good job. Yes. Now, if your opponent had said it won't guarantee a good job, well, that'd be a different issue. You're right. A college education won't guarantee a good job, but nothing will. So that I would use a different one. But a more common thing is it won't help you get a good job. That's easy to refute. Tons of evidence showing college education really does help you with jobs. Here's your second opponent's argument. It costs too much. So there I would probably use a partial concession because, yeah, college does cost a lot of money. It's expensive, especially when you consider that you're not working during that time. It costs a lot. But here would be my partial concession. Yes, it costs a lot, but we can find ways to make it less expensive. That's first response. So go to community college, get financial aid, get grants, get different things, okay? Second, it does pay for itself in a few years. So even though it is good, you're going to maybe have some debt at the end. You'll pay it off in a couple of years. Hopefully, if you play it smart, and it won't really cost that much. Point number three: you could be making money now. If you're not going to school, you could be working and making money. That is entirely true. There's nothing false about that. So I'd use the concession but. Say, yep, you're right. you could be making money. But really, they're not great opportunities. And it's not necessarily the best long-term investment, maybe for some people, but for a lot of people, the long-term investment is well worth it for college. So those are three different techniques, all right? Now, having said, those are the ways to be strong. One of those three will be the strongest way to respond, but you got to be fair. And there are two fallacies that are very unfair in dealing with opponent's argument. The first is a straw man fallacy. In the straw man fallacy, you state an opponent's argument in an unrealistically weak way. Maybe one your opponent's not even really advocating. And then you defeat it easily. So in other words, it's like beating up a scarecrow, right? Anybody could beat up a scarecrow. And it's the same way you're beating up an argument your opponent's not even making. Readers normally can see through your unfairness. And if they do, then it's going to really diminish your ethos. Here's an example, all right? So again, I'm supporting the idea that college is worth it, and I'm stating my opponent's argument. People who skip college think that they will all become fabulously rich by creating the next Facebook, becoming the next LeBron James, or winning the lottery. All right, that's an absurd caricature of your opponent's argument. Your opponent is not going to say everybody will become fabulously rich in these different ways. Your opponent's really just probably going to say there are other ways to become successful besides college. That would be the real argument. Here, I can easily defeat this argument we've written here because it's not really what my opponent is arguing. That's a straw man argument, okay? Another common way of being unfair is the ad hominem fallacy. You see this in politics all the time. In the ad hominem fallacy, you are attacking the person, not the idea. So the readers could see through that. And again, it diminishes your persona a lot. Here's an example. Some people think that college is a waste of time and money. However, they are booger-eating miscreants who are too moronic to handle the rigors of a college education. They're just too stupid to go to college. That's why they don't like college. When you attack the person and not the argument, it's unfair, and it's really beside the point. Well, maybe they are booger-eating morons. It's irrelevant whether college is a waste of time or money. If the person advocating it has that quality, it doesn't matter. So in other words, something can be true or false, and somebody can advocate it or not advocate it, and it's irrelevant who advocates it. What's relevant is the argument itself. All right, so we want to be strong, but we want to be fair. Now, what are some places in practical terms where you're going to address it in your essay? Preferably do this early in the essay. A lot of students tack it on at the end, and it's not always the most effective way, partly because you want to end on a strong note with your argument. So if you're ending with your by sowing doubts right at the very end, that's not the best place. Doing it early, maybe even your first body paragraph addressing counter arguments, and then by the time we're done with the essay, your reader has kind of forgotten about those early parts, and the reader's focused on the preponderance of evidence you've provided in the rest of the essay. Another good technique is to use the opponent's argument as a springboard into your own argument. So you begin the paragraph by saying, my opponent says this. However, now you respond by stating one of your positive arguments you wanted to make. This is a very good technique. I'll show you how that works in practical terms in a minute. Also, another place you could do it is in the body of the essay or the body of the paragraph. When you present your own evidence, you're giving your different evidence, you could throw in a counter argument in the middle of it, and then you could respond to that. So I'll show you these two techniques here in just a minute here. So let's look at a springboard to your own argument. So let's say we take this. We say, again, we're talking about the value of college. This is your argument. You're on the pro side. You're saying college is worthwhile. You're saying, okay, here's the reasons you're going to write. College will give you a better salary. College will give you job security. You can find affordable ways to get a college degree, and college will help develop your maturity. These are what you're going to write about for your essay. And you found some counter arguments. You did some research and you said, well, too expensive. That's a good counter argument. You can be successful in other ways too. That's a very good counter argument. And you don't retain much information. This is from our reading from the class. So again, that's a really good point. So one thing you'll notice is some of these link up very directly. So too expensive links up directly to can find affordable ways. So notice those are directly head-to-head points. So what you'd want to do is start a paragraph by stating this, and then you would lead into your positive point and spend most of the paragraph describing how you can find affordable ways. Can be successful in other ways. Now, maybe that's not so directly related, but still, I can see how it's related to the idea of better salary and job security. Yeah, you can find other ways to be successful. This is more likely, okay? So let me show you how I would do this. I can show you an outline of what I would do. Here's maybe my first body paragraph. I'd start off with my counter argument, saying it's too expensive. Some people who oppose college say it's too expensive. I would give a sentence or two explaining their point. I give them their due, give them a sentence or two explaining that, and then I would respond to it. Response number one, ways to make it affordable. And that would be, one of my main points. Response number two, you can have multiple responses. It pays in the long run. So I could use a wage comparison of high school grads versus college grads to say, yeah, it's expensive, but it really is going to pay for it. It'll pay for itself in no time. All right. So that is one way we address the counter argument. Second counter argument. Notice I have a whole paragraph for each of these counter arguments. I'm not listing all their counter arguments in one paragraph. One counter argument at a time, address it, and then move on to another. So again, this is another one where this is a springboard into your own argument, counter argument to other ways to be successful. And again, I'm going to give a couple sentences that in favor of my opponent. I'm actually going to state their evidence fairly and honestly, and then I'm going to respond to it. Well, the odds are better with a degree. Yeah, you could be successful in other ways, but your odds are really important about much better with a degree. I could reiterate the evidence from the wages. I could talk about employability, unemployment rates, things like that. Then maybe I could have a third counter argument. You don't retain too much information. And again, I could give my opponent's evidence first, and then I'm going to respond to it. You do retain material in your major. The article we read talks about that. And response number two, there's non-measurable growth that's important, like maturity. So even though you don't retain information, there's other things going on in college besides the retention of facts. It's also about your development of your personality, your thinking, your maturity. So all of these are examples of using their argument as a springboard into your own argument. I'll give you an example here. Actually, I want to make sure that when you're describing their opponent viewpoint and your viewpoint, you've got to manage that effectively with clear language. So make sure you clearly distinguish your opinion from your opponent's. I have some students who write and it's not clear whose opinion they're talking about, and it sounds like they're contradicting themselves. It's really confusing. Make sure you distinguish, here's my voice, here's where my opponent is talking. Make sure you fairly state your opponent's argument, give a sentence or two explaining their side, and then provide effective evidence and reasoning in response. So here's an example, and I'm going to have you take a minute to read this. So pause the video, read this, and notice the different techniques that I've just been talking about. So please pause the video now. So let me point out in this paragraph what we're doing here. So we begin with a topic sentence that states the opponent's objection. One of the most common objections to college is the expense. Notice it's clearly stating this is my opponent's side. And I'm giving more language showing this. Critics of higher education point out that the cost of a degree has increased by over 150% in the past 20 years, while wages have grown much more slowly. Again, I'm giving some evidence in favor of my opponent's point. I'm going to cite that too. This shows your reader that you've done your research and you've fairly and honestly looked at the opponent's viewpoint. That's really important. The result is that graduates are saddled with student loans that must be repaid. So here I've given my opponent's side. Now I'm going to transition into my response. While it is true that the costs have increased. This is a partial concession. It's also true that there are still affordable ways to pay for college. So this is a partial concession. Yeah, if it's increased, but here's my response. Now I'm giving evidence on my side. For instance, a community college costs a fraction of private universities. Public universities are much less expensive than private universities. Then we get a specific example here. We get the calculated total. And then we talk about the other response, which is you're gonna make more money when you're done. And then a concluding sentence that states your point. All right, so follow that pattern where we begin with the opponent, give some evidence on their side, and then respond with evidence. Now, I also mentioned you can respond to your opponent within the body of the paragraph. So I'll give you an example here. Again, I'm going to take the side that college is valuable. And I have a topic sentence. This is all one paragraph. Imagine this is one paragraph. I'm just doing the outline here. College is valuable because it teaches responsibility. Okay, so that's a common argument I've heard. College teaches responsibility. And one of the reasons is it demands more than high schools do. And here are some details showing how college teaches independence by demanding more. Also, many college students live on their own. That's also a way to develop responsibility. You have to feed yourself, clean up, wash, etc. Now, at this point, I can insert a counter argument in the middle of the paragraph here in response to this point. Because think about it, all right? College students live on their own, so they develop maturity. Well, that's true. But you can also do this by working and living on your own. If you work, you live on your own, you're actually going to develop maturity in a big way. You go to work or you get fired. You pay your rent or you get evicted. You have to feed yourself, clean up, all the same things. And so that undercuts this argument. Now, I still can respond to it. Here's a response. Well, yeah, but college teaches responsibility in a safe environment. The mistakes have repercussions, but they're not catastrophes. If you live on your own and you have a car payment and house payment and all kinds of things, and you fail to live up to your responsibilities, you get fired, you get evicted, that's pretty bad, man. That's really harsh. Whereas if you skip your classes, you're going to fail a class. Okay, well, you failed a class. You can retake the class, but it's not a blot on your resume. It's not like, what happened to you? Why'd you get fired from this job? Maybe you'll have to wear dirty clothes, but it's not, that you got evicted. You don't have an eviction on or a bankruptcy on your list. Okay. Also, there's assistants. There's teachers, counselors, friends, things like that. So this is an example of using the counter argument in the middle of the paragraph to respond to a criticism of your own evidence and argument. This can be very effective. It shows that you've really done a lot of thinking, that you didn't just think of your reasons and your evidence and didn't just blithely go on your way. It shows a high level of critical thinking. And in fact, that's really one of the real values of this activity of addressing your opponent's counter arguments. It really builds your ethos. You look like somebody who's really thought it out and that you're fair, you've looked at both sides. It also improves the quality of your argument. It sharpens your argument. I've seen a lot of students who say an argument like this, oh, college guarantees a good job. And then they think about counter arguments, and it's easy to refute that, right? It doesn't guarantee nothing, no guarantees, right? And so they change their language. They say, well, college doesn't guarantee a good job. Now instead of saying, they say, well, college helps promote a better quality job, improves your chances of getting a better quality job. So it helps, um, it helps you sharpen your communication. It helps your thinking evolve. Instead of thinking of just simplistic issues, you look at it from different sides, and your thinking grows. And ultimately, it promotes the discovery of truth. I've gone through this process in my essays, and in a number of times, I've changed my perspective. I thought one thing at the beginning, and then by thinking it through and trying to make arguments, and then shooting down in my mind, I shoot down all my own arguments. I say, wow, I'm wrong. I this other side's the truth. And that's a really great thing. That's a real sign of growth and development. And that's really ultimately what this is about. It's not just about winning arguments. It's about developing as a person, and arriving at a firm sense of the truth. All right. Look forward to seeing how you respond to your opponent's arguments.